Should investors expect? We want to bring in Martin Feldstein. He is Harvard professor and former chairman of President Reagan's Council of Economic Advisors and economic advisor to Jeb Bush presidential campaign. Marty, good to see you.
Good to see you.
Thank you so much for joining us. First on the Fed, what are you expecting?
I think they're going to pass. I think that they're not going to do what they should do, which is to start raising rates, start normalizing. But I think they have talked themselves into being nervous, and so I think they're going to hold back.
So you think they should, though, raise interest rates, is what you're saying?
Yes, I think they should.
Let me just push back on that for a second, because earlier we had Wilbur Ross on the show, and he said that 38% of working age people do not have a job and, frankly, do not want a job. He's looking at the participation rate. So all this talk that the employment numbers are getting better, let's not forget the participation rate.
Yeah, but the participation rate is off by 3 percentage points over the last several years. And why is it off? It's off because the population is aging. So about half of that decline in the participation rate reflects the fact that as people age, they are more likely to retire.
Yeah, I mean, with all due respect to Wilbur, I don't think focusing on the LFPR is the right thing. But, Marty, how do you feel about the jobs picture? We obviously have this U3 rate down to 5.1. We have, non-farm payrolls growing, but the rate of change is slowing there. Do you see that rate picking back up?
No, we're running out of people. We're running out of people to hire. Among college graduates, the unemployment rate is 2.5%.
Yeah, that's college graduates. That's a good point.
So
but overall, it's 5.1%. So we can't continue to increase the number of people employed after we've already gone through bringing the unemployment rate down from over 10%
we had the CEO
to 5%.
of Korn Ferry on yesterday talking to Maria, and he basically said the quality of the jobs is not good right now in this country. People are in jobs that they don't necessarily want. They're taking them on just to be employed. And the quality of the jobs, in fact, he said, is deteriorating. So when you look at the underemployment numbers in this country, I think that's a more realistic look at the overall jobs picture in the U.S. Do you disagree?
Well, it's hard to think about how you generalize whether the jobs are better or worse. Certainly, we're not producing the kind of training and education that would give people, quote, better jobs. And a lot of people are going to college and they're studying things that have no market value, and then they come out and they're surprised. They get a job that they say, oh, this didn't require going to college. So in that sense, he's right in saying that the jobs are not what people would hope for.
But it's not just about jobs, right? I mean, can the U.S. sustain growth when all of our trading partners, or many of our trading partners, are actually challenged? Canada is in recession. Japan is in recession. Australia is close to recession. We know what's going on in Europe. We know what's going on in China. So how much of a factor for the Fed will this international challenge be?
Basically, we can grow domestically. We can create jobs. We have created jobs while Europe has not. Europe has an 11+% unemployment rate, and the U.S. has continually improved. So I think too much is made of the external thing. Think about China, where there's a lot of talk about, well, China is slowing, and what's that going to do to the U.S.? Our exports to China are less than 1% of our GDP. It's just not a big deal.
It's not a big deal, but yeah, is 25 basis points a big deal, Sandra?
I was going to say, you sound awfully optimistic, which is, I mean, that's refreshing to hear, because not a lot of people think the economic numbers right now are good, particularly in this country. If you're so optimistic on jobs, you're pretty optimistic on our trade partners. You're optimistic.
No, I'm not optimistic on them. I think they're in big trouble. I think it just doesn't pull us down.
Okay, so why not raise rates then this week? Why
we should.
They should.
Yes,
he says we should, but he doesn't think they will. They'll be afraid to.
I think from the Fed's point of view, why should they raise rates now? What they want to do is to drive down the unemployment rate even further. They've said 5.1 is essentially full employment, but they'd like to drive it down more.
Well, they've lowered that bar.
They keep lowering it.
Lowering that bar, but that has a lot to do with how you define what the natural rate of unemployment is.
But their view is, even if we overshoot, overshoot the natural rate of unemployment and go down into the 4s, what'll that do? Well, it'll create some jobs for people who are not working now, and it'll push up wages, and that's part of their goal.
Unemployment has come down quite a bit already. How come wages haven't risen more? And that's the big question.
Productivity is very sluggish.
Yes.
So if productivity isn't growing, wages are not going to grow. So we've got to do things to change what businesses are doing, change the kind of investments that are happening. And that will lead to improvements in productivity.
I'm glad you brought up wages. Do you think these issues are going to come up tonight? We have all been talking about this need for specifics in terms of plans from these candidates. You have been advising Jeb Bush. What is Jeb going to say tonight?
I have no idea what he's going to say tonight.
Do you think he has the goods in terms of knowledge about wages, jobs, trade? We haven't heard anything from any of these candidates in terms of specifics.
Well, you certainly have, you certainly have from Jeb Bush. I mean, he had a long piece about his tax plan. He's very specific about.
But nobody's listening, Martin. I mean, that's the thing. I hate to carry some.
She didn't ask whether people would listen. She only asked whether he had.
This is true. This is true. Okay, so I'm going to call you out. No, you called me out on something during the commercial break, and I try not to do this. But you did say you felt like we were being kind of critical of Donald Trump. And I don't think that I was. I think that I was being more critical of the rest of the GOP field for complaining about Donald Trump rather than just emerging on their own right. So what could these other candidates do tonight to change that? Donald Trump is leading the conversation.
I have no idea. If I were,
you're the guy supposed to know.
I'm not in that business. I mean, I have talked with Governor Bush about specifics, about his tax plan, about other things, but not about how he deals with the media or with the public appearance.
Well, tell us what you've spoken about with Jeb Bush. Tell us about the specifics on the tax plan. He did an op-ed a couple of days ago. What's most important in terms of his tax plan?
Basically, it is to provide the kind of incentives that we have lost over the last couple of decades. When Ronald Reagan left the White House, the top tax rate was 28%. It's now over 40%. The Bush plan calls for bringing it back down again. One of the things that I like about the Bush proposal is that it will allow married women to file their tax returns separately. Now, when a married woman thinks about going to work, she says, well, look, my husband is in the 25% bracket. Every extra dollar that he earns is 25% plus the Social Security payroll tax. So if I go to work, I'm going to end up paying on my first dollar of earnings, I'm going to pay that. But under the Bush proposal, she gets to file as a separate individual, so that she gets to file, and on her first dollar of earnings, she pays zero.
But can't you file? You could file as a couple or individually,
yes,
right now.
But it's very disadvantageous under current law. So you get a separate schedule for doing it, and it is not a good thing. So we've got the marriage penalty, and we've got rules which really hurt women who want to go to work or who want to work full-time rather than part-time, and this is a nice feature of the Bush plan.
I say, all right. So,
but also on the corporate side, we have been losing business to the rest of the world because our corporate tax rate is now the highest tax rate in the world. It wasn't always that, but it's 35% statutory rate. The president, the candidate, has talked about bringing it down to 20%, which would make it competitive with what's going on in Europe, in China, and other countries.
So they're trying to unravel President Obama's tax plan.
Seems like a good idea, doesn't it?
I'd have to agree with that. Marty, good to have you on the show today.
Good.